Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's Vin PF, and on today's episode we're going to be going back to the Whisky Works. If you remember last year, November time, I covered the Quartermaster, which came up in a tasting that I did last year with the Dram team, and it blew me away. It was really good on that one. This one was also in that tasting set, and it's also very good indeed. Now I picked this up because the guys at White Mackay sent this over to me after doing that tasting for me to check out along with the Quartermaster. So here we have the King of Trees. Now this has got some excellent information on here. We'll go into the Whisky Works in a moment. I'm just going to talk about the King of Trees itself and what's actually in this. So here, information as you can see at the bottom here. It's a 10-year-old Highland blended malt whisky, part finished in native Scottish oak cask, which is very, very interesting indeed. Now, Whisky Works itself are a kind of independent arm of White Mackay's, and they're kind of headed up by Greg Glass, who is ex-Compass Box, and he's doing really innovative things and experimental things with what's available to them in the White Mackay arm. Now, some interesting things you'll note about these particular kind of offerings, this one and the other one, and the others that they have available on the website, is that they're all natural coloured, non-chill filtered, higher ABVs, and all things that we generally speaking like as whisky enthusiasts. This is definitely marketed towards me and probably you if you're watching this video. Back to the actual whisky itself. Now the last one we tried was a mixture of all kinds of weird different casks. This one isn't quite so kind of far reaching, but it does have some cool, interesting things going on with it. Now as I mentioned earlier, this is obviously going to be taken from the White Mackay brand portfolio, let's say. So some information on here that we have, although it is a blended whisky, it's a Highland blended and a malt Highland blended. So we can take a pretty good guess. This is probably a mixture of Dalmore and Fettercan. That's my guess. I don't actually know that for a fact. Now the way they've done this with the barrels, they've aged this for a minimum of 10 years. Part of it's been aged in first fill ex-bourbon casks, and part of it's been aged in refill American oak, so again I'll probably assume that's ex-bourbon casks. Now the weird thing about this one is that they've then taken part of that. I'm not sure what proportions they're talking about here, whether they've taken some of both of it or part of just one of those kind of extras. In any case, that's then been part finished in native Scottish oak. Now, this is something we don't see very often, and the primary reason for that is that it's really difficult to get a stretch of the wood that doesn't have any knots in it, which you can't have knots when you're making your staves for your barrel. This particular tree or set of trees, not sure if it's just one tree, I think it's just one, but it might be a set of trees. These are 200-year-old Scottish oak trees that were wind felled. They just fell over in part of a storm, so they put them to good use, and the whole lot of this thing made just one cask, which is kind of sad but also kind of cool at the same time. That's the reason why you don't really see it much anymore, and probably the reason why this one is a little bit extra special rather than just a normal whiskey aged in the normal way. Enough about that all out. Let's get into the actual whiskey itself and see what we've got in the glass. Now, as we mentioned earlier, natural colour, non-chill filtered, so we can talk a little bit about that. It's kind of like a white winey colour, which is it's pretty good. It's pretty good for 10 years in Scotland, I would say. Pretty average. It's and especially because part of it's aged first fill as well, so it's got some good colour in there as well. Let's get onto the nose and see what we've got. It's got a really good nose. I didn't mention the ABV. The ABV on this is 46.5, which is a good ABV. This runs for about £75, so it isn't cheap, I have to say. It isn't cheap, but probably worth it. Let's get into it and find out. Now, one of the funny things about this nose is that, gun to head, if this was a blind tasting, I would probably say that this was Speyside, because it's got those kind of like those orchard fruits, those apples, those pears that I tend to pick out quite keenly in Speyside whiskey, but it's got those vanillas and the kind of extra sugary notes that you might expect from kind of like an ex-bourbon matured whiskey. But for me, there's this kind of additional, almost white wininess to it. It isn't quite as pungent as kind of an average white wine, but there's definitely some kind of grape elements to it there. Let's get onto the palate. Okay, it starts out pretty familiar. It's more of those apples and pears. Vanilla's coming through. More of those sugary elements coming through, but it isn't kind of like sweet, sickly sweet. It's just you're getting that kind of that sugary vibe. It's almost like, I mean, they say on here like apple pie, and it really is true. You know, I try not to kind of relay tasting notes that are on the bottle, but if they're there, they're there, and I get them, I get them. And to finish, it's got this really high spiciness to it. It's kind of like a cinnamony spice. It's quite bold actually. Like I saw some reviews that were saying it's quite soft, but I think it's quite bold spiciness. It's nicely well balanced though. And the finish is huge, really. It's definitely what I would class as long. That well over a minute, and you keep getting that spiciness coming through once the fruitiness has kind of disappeared, and it is a little bit drying on the back end, a little bit sour, but these are just tasting notes. Yeah, so for me, really enjoyed this one. I did have to say that out of the two that I received, the Quartermaster was my favourite one of the two, but this one is still an excellent whiskey. Now these guys are doing some really impressive stuff at the moment, so even if this one doesn't pique your interest, and it probably should if you can get hold of it. I think it's just UK only at the moment, but have a look to see. But go on their website and see the stuff that they're doing. They've got some extra age whiskey, some 21-year-old stuff going on. But it's it's a tough thing to say, but it's basically what when I think about brands like Dalmore and Jura and Fetica and things like that, and the stuff that they're putting out on a regular basis, I drink it and I enjoy those whiskies, but I can't help thinking that I wish they produced something that was a little bit more aimed towards me. And this is kind of like those thoughts being realised in bottles. This and the Quartermaster. It's that White and Mackay branding, but with that extra element of effort to get kind of really get into what me, you, and people watching really want to try, and that's that kind of natural coloured, non-chill filtered, good ABVs, interesting cask choices, less messing around in the blending process, and just really just getting down to really good tasting whiskey. And that's what this is. So if that piques your interest, make sure you go and check these guys out. There's some affiliate links in the description below. If you want to hit that up and support the channel a bit more, you can purchase through Master of Malt through that, and that helps me just a little bit extra. Thanks for watching today's video. If you enjoyed the content and you want to help support the channel, please do check out Patreon or the join button below, just like these guys scrolling across the screen right now. Thanks for watching.